No, the Declaration of Independence is not a law. No, it's not part of the Constitution. But in many ways, its words have become a moral standard for which the United States should strive. By 8 days after the first signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Continental Congress concluded there should be some kind of a formalized government. A committee had been appointed and on July 12 submitted a 13-part proposal to be called the Articles of Confederation. It would be a simple matter of approving a new government structure and getting on with the business of the United States and the Revolution. A simple matter. Wrong. Well, the Congress approved it okay, a mere 16 months later, in November of 1777. But the big problem lay in the language of the last of the 13 articles, which said that before going into effect, the document had to be ratified by every single state. Not only that, but the articles could not be amended or modified without approval of the Congress and approval of the legislature of every single state. It was an all-or-nothing deal. Finally, on March 1, 1781, almost 5 years after receiving the proposal, the Articles of Confederation went into effect. Probably the biggest cause for the long delay was some people's basic distrust of government.
I may be wrong on this, but there was a guy from South Carolina by the name of Gadsden who early on, and I'm talking in the 1760s, said we're all Americans. And then when he was afraid of a strong central government, he said, I don't want anybody, and this is what led to the Articles of Confederation, which was really a league of 13 states. He said, I don't want anybody fooling around with the rights of my native country, South Carolina.
There was no president or chief executive. What powers existed lay with the Congress. A state could send from 2 to 7 members, but that wasn't important because each state only had 1 vote. Passing anything required 9 of the 13 votes. That's about 69%. Members of the Congress were elected for 1-year terms, and they were term limited. You could serve no more than 3 years out of any 6-year period. The Confederation was officially described as, quote, a league of friendship for common defense. It says each state shall maintain its own delegates, which seems to mean that the salary, travel, and expenses of a member of Congress had to be paid by his own state legislature. Article 2 of the Confederation reads, quote, each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this Confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled, end quote. The language is similar to the later 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and it's about states' rights, but an unspoken meaning was about slavery. I'm going to take up that subject in 1777. Foreign affairs was in the hands of Congress, as was the conduct of wars. Defense and war expenditures would come from a common treasury, and what national taxation there was would be apportioned based on the value of a state's land and buildings. And that seemed to be one of the problems. The Confederation was not raising enough revenue to pay for what government they had, limited as it was. But there was a solution. By winning the Revolution, the Americans now owned and controlled all that land out west of the Appalachians. And the easiest way to raise money was to start selling land.
It was sold to our citizens for $1 an acre, which sounds like a horrible bargain, but really was quite expensive in terms of that. And some land companies had bribed members of the Congress to sell it much cheaper to big land companies because this was a revenue act, and they wanted to bring in revenue to keep the articles going, and much cheaper, maybe 8 cents an acre or something. And one of the interesting things is, so there was bribery, what's new in this world, but the principle, I think, is somewhat important, even though there's some tarnish to it, that people would be able. And it became a policy that Washington had and that Lincoln ultimately helped him get elected in 1860 was a promise of a Homestead Act of 1862. That was a very important issue in the election of 1860.
Looking back over the past 2+ centuries, it seems the most significant thing the Confederation did was approve the Northwest Ordinance. The Northwest Ordinance set in law the method by which an area could become a territory, how it would be governed, and how a territory would become a state. And what's interesting is that this law, under the Articles of Confederation, adopted several years before the U.S. Constitution, is still the law today. And what is significant is that the details outlined in the ordinance serves as the working constitution for American territories, including the 49 years that Arizona was a territory. Beyond that, the loose confederation just really didn't work.
It needed a stronger central government to kind of hold it together, and the Articles really didn't provide that. It was a confederacy more, where the states could well, you had to have a unanimous decision. And it just didn't work. It sounds good, but it didn't work. And so the Founding Fathers later realized we would have to have a constitution, and this would call for a stronger central government and hold the states together, would hold the states together better.
Well, the delegates met up in Philadelphia and proceeded to do two things, which, if done